When I was 60, I was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave me at best 14 months. That was 45 years ago. My name is Barbara Sue. I live alone in a 2-bedroom house in Asheville, North Carolina. I cook my own meals, tend my own garden, walk 2 miles every morning before the neighborhood wakes up, and I haven't asked my children for help with a single thing since I was 75 years old. I left the nursing music home they put me in voluntarily against medical advice, and I have not looked back once. I don't want anyone to go through what I did with cancer. That's why I made this video. I am going to tell you everything. The foods, the habits, music, the things I did that the doctors eventually admitted contributed to what they called in a published case review one of the most statistically music improbable recoveries in modern oncology. I'm going to tell you the practical things, music, the things you can start tomorrow, the things that cost nothing and require no prescription. But I'm also going to tell you the part I've kept mostly to myself for a long time. Music, the part that happened in a hospital hallway when I was at my lowest point. Music, the conversation that I believe is responsible for the other 70% of why I'm still here. Most people who hear that part don't know what to do with it. That's fine. Music. You don't have to do anything with it except hear it. You are old enough to decide for yourself what's true. Stay with me until the end. The order of what I'm about to share matters. Music. Each piece connects to the next. What I did wrong first, and for a long time, I want to be honest with you in a way that health content rarely is. Music, I spent the first year after my diagnosis doing everything right on paper and continuing music to decline. I followed the oncology protocol. I underwent surgery. I went through chemotherapy. I music lost 34 pounds. I lost my hair. I read every book I could find. I watched every video, listened to every expert, tried every supplement that a well-meaning friend or a late-night internet search music suggested. I drank green juice I couldn't afford and didn't enjoy. I did all of it with the grim, joyless determination music of someone checking boxes before the end. And I kept getting worse. I want to be clear. Music. I am not telling you that medicine is wrong. The surgery saved my immediate life. The oncology team at my hospital were dedicated, music-skilled people who genuinely cared. I am not here to argue against any of that. Music. What I am telling you is that I was putting premium fuel into an engine that had a fundamental problem I hadn't identified yet. And until I identified that problem, music, nothing else was going to work the way it was supposed to. But let me start with the practical things because they matter. They are music real, and for a large portion of you watching this, they may be exactly enough. The first thing I changed, water before anything else. I was chronically dehydrated without knowing it. My doctor never mentioned music it. It wasn't until I read a study years later after my recovery, when I was trying to understand what had happened to me, that I learned what dehydration does to a body over 60. Music. Your lymphatic system, the network responsible for collecting and removing cellular waste and damaged DNA, runs almost entirely on water. When you are dehydrated, that system slows. Damaged music cells accumulate. Inflammation rises. And chronic inflammation, the research is now very clear on this, is one of the primary conditions under which cancer initiates and grows. Music. Here is what I do and what I did during my recovery without exception. I keep a full glass of filtered water on my nightstand. The moment my feet hit the floor in the morning, before coffee, before food, before I look at my phone, music, I drink all of it. 20 ounces minimum. I add a squeeze of fresh lemon, not for flavor, though I've grown to love it. Lemon peel contains a compound called D-limonene, which has documented anti-tumor activity in laboratory research. I also walk for 30 minutes within the first hour of waking, not a stroll. I walk at a pace where I could hold a conversation, but would find it difficult to sing. Music. This matters because movement stimulates lymphatic flow directly. The combination of morning hydration and morning movement, according to research I read from Music the Karolinska Institute, compounds the cellular cleansing effect significantly. I have done this every single day for over 40 music years. I have not missed a day due to illness in longer than I can remember. Make of that what you will. Music. The second thing, I stopped eating sterile food. One of music, the stranger pieces of advice I received during my illness came from my gastroenterologist, who suggested I be very careful about food safety, given that my immune system was compromised from treatment. Music. The implication was eat clean, eat cooked, be careful. What no one told me at the time, and what the research has since demonstrated clearly, is that your gut microbiome, music, is your immune system's primary manufacturing facility. When I was eating nothing but soft, processed, pasteurized, thoroughly cooked music food, I was starving the microbial community that my body needed most desperately. It was a woman I met in a recovery group, not a physician, who suggested I try kefir, plain, full-fat, naturally fermented kefir, music, and a small portion of raw sauerkraut, the kind from the refrigerated section music, with nothing but cabbage and salt on the label, not the shelf-stable pasteurized music variety. Within 90 days, I felt something change. I cannot explain it more precisely than that. A quality of inflammation that had lived behind my eyes and in my joints for years began to quietly retreat. Music. The mechanism, which I understand better now than I did then, involves short-chain fatty acids, music, particularly one called butyrate, which is produced when beneficial gut bacteria process fiber. Music butyrate has been shown to signal precancerous cells in the colon to undergo programmed cell death before music they can cause harm. It also dramatically reduces systemic inflammation. I eat one serving of naturally fermented food music every single day. I pair it with garlic or leeks, which feed the beneficial bacteria, music, the fermented foods introduce. This combination is not expensive. Music. It is not complicated. It has been practiced in traditional food cultures around the world for thousands of years. Western medicine is only now beginning to formally music study what those cultures apparently understood intuitively. The third thing, I learned to walk as medicine, music. I mentioned the morning walk already, but I want to be more specific about why it works, because music, understanding the mechanism, helped me stay consistent in a way that simple habit advice never did. Cancer music cells have a metabolic quirk first identified by a biochemist named Otto Warburg in Music the 1930s and confirmed by hundreds of subsequent studies. They are almost exclusively dependent on glucose for fuel. Music. They are poor at using oxygen for energy. Normal cells can use both. When you engage in sustained music, moderate intensity physical movement, the kind that raises your heart rate to somewhere between 55 and 70% of your maximum, you accomplish music two things simultaneously. You deplete circulating blood glucose, removing the preferred fuel of cancer music cells, and you flood your tissues with oxygenated blood, creating a physiological environment that is actively hostile to cancer cell survival. A 2020 analysis of data music from 1.4 million adults found that regular moderate physical activity was associated with a 42% reduction in colon cancer risk and a 38% reduction in breast music cancer risk. These are extraordinary numbers for something that requires no prescription, no copay, and no specialist referral. I walk 35 minutes 5 days a week before my music first full meal. The fasted state amplifies the glucose-depleting effect. I walk somewhere with natural morning light whenever possible because morning sunlight regulates the body's circadian rhythm, which in turn governs music, immune surveillance, the body's continuous automated cancer detection process. I am 105. I walked music this morning. The fourth thing, the vegetable I wish I had known about at 40. If I could go back and give my younger self one specific piece of dietary advice, it would be this. Music, eat broccoli sprouts prepared correctly 3 times a week minimum. Music. The active compound is called sulforaphane. It is found in all cruciferous vegetables. Music broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, but most potently in raw broccoli sprouts, which music contain up to 50 times more sulforaphane per gram than the mature vegetable. What sulforaphane does inside the body is, frankly, music remarkable. It activates a genetic switch called NRF2, music, which triggers over 200 protective genes simultaneously. Genes involved in detoxification, music, antioxidant defense, and the repair of damaged DNA before it can mutate into music cancer. Research from Johns Hopkins found this. Research from the University of Illinois found a 52% music reduction in bladder cancer risk associated with regular sulforaphane consumption. A study from Roswell Park found that sulforaphane targets cancer stem cells, the particular type of cell music that conventional chemotherapy often fails to eliminate, and that is responsible for cancer recurrence. Here is the critical preparation detail that most people get wrong. Sulforaphane is not present in broccoli in its active form. Music. It is created through a chemical reaction triggered when you chop or chew the vegetable, activating an enzyme called myrosinase. Cooking above 140 degrees Fahrenheit destroys that enzyme entirely. Music, fully cooked broccoli, delivers very little active sulforaphane. The correct preparation: chop or crush your broccoli or sprouts. Let music them sit for 40 minutes before consuming or cooking. Then steam for no more than 3 to 4 minutes. Raw broccoli sprouts require no cooking at all. I add a small amount of mustard seed powder to cooked cruciferous vegetables. Music, which independently contains active myrosinase and restores the enzyme activity that cooking removed. Music increasing sulforaphane absorption by up to 4-fold. I have eaten some form of cruciferous vegetable prepared this way nearly every day for 4 decades. Music. The fifth thing, sleep as the master switch. Of everything I have described, this is the one that had the most dramatic immediate effect during my recovery. Not because it is the most important in isolation, but because nothing else works properly when this is broken. Music. During deep slow wave sleep, what researchers call stage 3, music, and stage 4, your body produces its highest concentrations of melatonin, not simply a sleep music hormone, one of the most powerful antioxidants your body manufactures internally. Melatonin directly inhibits music tumor angiogenesis, meaning it blocks cancer from building the new blood vessels required for growth. It stimulates natural music killer cells, the frontline immune cells whose specific function is to identify and destroy cancer cells before they can establish themselves. Music melatonin production declines by up to 70% between the ages of 40 and 70. Most people over 65 music are producing negligible amounts during sleep. When I understood this, I restructured my entire evening. I am in bed by 10 o'clock. My room music is completely dark. Even small amounts of light suppress melatonin production. My room temperature is between 65 music and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I stop eating 3 hours before sleep because digestion competes with the cellular repair work the body prioritizes at night. Music. At 8 o'clock in the evening, I drink a small glass of tart cherry juice, which contains natural melatonin precursors. Music. Within 6 weeks of beginning this protocol during my cancer treatment, my energy level shifted in a way that was noticeable to everyone around me. My oncologist commented on it at my next appointment. She asked what I had changed. When I told her, she paused for a long moment and said she had never specifically discussed sleep architecture with a cancer patient before. I slept 7.5 hours last night. Sleep the same tonight. Now here is the part I promised you. Everything I have just described is real. The research is real. The results were real. I would encourage anyone facing a serious diagnosis, Music, to implement every single one of those practices immediately and without apology. And I need to tell you that in my honest assessment, looking back across 45 years, what I have, Music, described above accounts for perhaps 30% of why I am here. Let me tell you about the hallway. It was a Tuesday afternoon somewhere in the second year after my diagnosis, during a period when the treatment had plateaued, Music, and my numbers had not improved in 3 consecutive months. I was sitting in a chair in the hallway of the oncology wing, Music, waiting for a scan, and I was very quietly giving up. Not dramatically, not with tears, just the quiet, private acknowledgement that I was tired, that I had tried everything, that perhaps the kindest thing I could do for my family, Music, was to stop fighting so hard and let things move at whatever pace they were going to move. A woman sat down next to me. Music. I recognized her after a moment as someone I had known briefly in college. We had been in the same literature class 40 years earlier. Her name, Music, was Dorothy. I would not have recognized her if she had not spoken first, and not because she had aged, because she had not aged. She was Music, 73 years old. She looked, and I mean this without any exaggeration, the way a strong and healthy 40-year-old looks. Clear eyes, upright posture, a quality of calm that I found almost unsettling in that environment. Music. She was there visiting a friend on another floor. We talked for perhaps 90 minutes. I asked her eventually what she had, Music, done, what her secret was. She smiled as though she had been waiting for that question, and she said something I want to try to share with you as precisely as I can remember it. She said, "You understand that your body is not what it appears in the mirror." She said, Music, if you look through a microscope at the tissue of your hand, you do not see solid matter. You see particles in motion. Look deeper than that, beyond the cellular level to the subatomic Music level, and what you see is not even particles anymore. What you see is electromagnetic waves, fields of energy moving, interacting, Music, constantly changing. She said, your body is, at its most fundamental level, energy, Music, and the physical environment around you, the chair you're sitting in, the walls, Music, of this hallway, the space between us, is also, at its most fundamental level, energy, Music. This is not a spiritual claim. This is what physics describes. This is what quantum mechanics demonstrates. Music. She said, given that, there are really only 2 questions that matter about your health. What kind of waves are you generating, and what kind of waves are you letting into your music field? She told me she had been practicing Falun Dafa for 20 years. Music. She did not press it on me. She simply explained what it had meant for her. A set of gentle meditative exercises, yes, but more fundamentally, Music, a framework for understanding the relationship between thought, energy, and physical reality. The foundational principles, she said, Music, were truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, not as abstract virtues, but as practical, energetic facts. Music. She explained it this way. Anger generates a particular kind of internal state. Music. At the molecular level, the stress hormones produced by chronic anger, resentment, Music, and hostility create an internal environment that suppresses immune function. Music elevates inflammation, and as a growing body of research in psychoneuroimmunology, Music is beginning to document, creates the exact cellular conditions under which cancer initiates and proliferates. Music, this is not metaphorical. It is biochemical. But she was pointing at something deeper than the biochemistry. She said, think about the life you have lived up to now. Music. Be honest with yourself. How much of your mental life has been spent in conflict? Not necessarily conflict you expressed outwardly. Music, internal conflict. The running tape of resentment. The relationships that never resolved. Music, the sense that life had not given you what you deserved. The quiet anger at specific music people who, years later, still occupy mental real estate they, music, were never invited to keep. I sat with that for a moment. I had lived, I realized as she said it, in a state of nearly continuous low-grade conflict for most of my adult life, with colleagues, with my former husband, with relatives who had disappointed me, with myself, perhaps most of all. I had never acted beyond the limits of music, what was socially acceptable. I had never considered myself an angry person, but the tape had been running. Every perceived slight, music, every unmet expectation, every relationship that had ended in a way that still, decades later, music did not feel resolved. It had all been stored somewhere, playing on repeat, quietly consuming music energy that my body needed for other purposes. Dorothy said, when I began this practice, I began to understand that those thoughts were not music passive. They were generative. Every thought of resentment, envy, or bitterness, regardless of whether it was justified, music, regardless of whether the other person deserved it, was creating a wave that I was sending into my own field. Music, and at the molecular level, that wave was returning, not as punishment, as physics. Music as simple cause and effect, at a scale we don't normally think about. She said, conversely, genuine kindness, music, not performed kindness, not strategic kindness, but the real internal state, music of compassion for other human beings, including the ones who have hurt you, generates a different kind of wave entirely. And that wave, music, also returns. I went home that evening, and I lay in the dark for a long time, and I thought about my life as honestly as I ever had. I thought about my former husband and the ways I had held on to that resentment for 15 years like something precious I was owed. I thought about a colleague who had, in my view, music treated me unfairly early in my career, and how I had quietly nursed that grievance music for decades. I thought about my mother, who had died before I could tell her the things I should have said. I thought about myself, the version of me that had never believed she was quite good enough, quite loved enough, quite lucky enough, and I began, music, slowly and imperfectly, and without any dramatic moment of resolution, to let it go. Not because the grievances were illegitimate, some of them were entirely legitimate, not because forgiveness meant music, that what had happened was acceptable, but because I finally understood, in a way that felt physical rather than philosophical, that the person those thoughts were harming was me, that I was the one who had been living inside them. Music, I began to practice what Dorothy had described. I did not become a different person overnight. I am not telling you I found some perfect music piece and was immediately healed. What I am telling you is that over the following 12 months, music, something in my body changed. My inflammation markers improved in ways my oncology team, music, could not fully explain against the backdrop of my treatment plan. My energy returned. My scan results at the 1-year mark showed something that prompted my oncologist to use the word music she had previously told me she was hesitant to use, remission. And then music at the 2-year mark, a word she said she had genuinely not expected to say, clear. I am not asking you to believe that thought created this outcome by itself. Music, I believe the food mattered. I believe the sleep mattered. I believe the walking and the water and the sulforaphane all played real roles in a real biological process. What I am asking you to consider is that you may be working very hard on 30% of the problem. Music. The other 70% is quieter. It does not come in a supplement bottle.